Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, May the 6th. Parties on the left and right are coming under scrutiny in the final hours of the local election campaign. Nigel Farage is facing questions about his fishy, Kemi Badenoch's word, £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne. And the Greens' Zach Polanski stands accused of falsely claiming to have been a spokesperson for the British Red Cross and also liking social posts that highlighted Israeli influence over Labour. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Busy day today. We've got the final polling verdict ahead of the big day on Thursday. And I've been sitting down with Kemi Badenoch. I got back from the West Midlands very late last night. She gave me some really quite surprising answers. So we're going to run through a chunk of that in a moment.
Looking forward to that. And we've got news of how Keir Starmer continues to plan a Save My Skin campaign with news of a possible reset speech next week. Not another one.
God. Right, let's crack on. Let's do the final national voting intention poll as we go into local elections day. That's got Reform UK on 25, down 1, Labour on 18, no change, Conservatives on 17%, down 2, Greens on 15, no change, and Lib Dems on 14%, which is up 1. So the broad picture of British politics is quite samey to what we're used to, but those tiny movements, which are and within the margin of error, are quite likely to be psychologically important just because of our winner culture in politics. So what leaps out is Labour edging into second place just as we head to the polls, with the Tories who are on third, so that'll boost Starmer a little, as will the fact that the Greens are now back in fourth. So let's just briefly start there, and on the Greens, I don't think anyone would claim they'd had the best of few days just before polling day.
Well, you'd think, but the Greens' default setting tends to be to try to tough it out and deflect in their official responses to the scale of this onslaught and negative stories about the party. The line I think they're trying to walk is that, particularly if we take anti-Semitism as the core of their problems and the attacks that they're getting, including some of the last Labour social videos have been on that topic. Well, they want to keep people on board who want a party to be outspoken on Gaza, to be highly critical of Israel, but of course they want to skirt the parts of the agenda that would open them to the charge of rehoming supporters with anti-Semitic instincts, the kind of Corbyn era problem. So for instance, on Zach Polanski liking posts, which did seem to suggest in some cases inordinate Jewish influence or Israeli influence over Keir Starmer. So the Green Party response is Zach makes no apology for highlighting the close relationship between Israel and the Labour government, which has led to Labour and Keir Starmer, very personally, arming and supporting a genocide. So they go off and use that G word, which the other parties would, I think, certainly avoid. The difficulty there is Polanski really not owning the message, it seems to me anyway, of rooting out anti-Semitism. Of course, we'll say criticising Israel is not the same necessarily, but Caroline Lucas, the former leader, is effectively saying in a social post that she thinks that it should be much clearer, that line in the sand. You just look at the fact that the Greens are investigating more than 30 prospective councillors for allegations of anti-Jewish racism. And they are having to do the hard work of going through their candidates, but at the same time, are they really owning that a narrative clearly enough?
I think that's right. It's interesting. The Green Party are still the top party for the environment, according to the latest polling, but that isn't what we've spent a lot of time talking about in relation to the Green Party, is it? It's just moved on since Zach Polanski took over in terms of what its focus is. Let's see how it does on Thursday. Right, two more final bits of polling. We've got the last YouGov polling projections for Scotland and Wales. Both give us quite interesting stories, I think, as well. In Scotland, YouGov's central projection has John Swinney winning again, returning to Butte House, but the SNP now just missing out on an overall majority in Holyrood on 62 seats, which is down a bit from the last time YouGov done one of these. They were at 67 under a month ago. Now, YouGov's Patrick English is saying that they put this down to pro-union tactical voting. I have to say Labour's still on third on 17, behind Reform on 19.
John Swinney's been saying in the campaign, if the SNP win a majority, there would be a push for a second referendum on independence. It's obviously much harder if that isn't the outcome as the poll suggests. And he has set the bar pretty high for success here in these elections by insisting that the SNP needs that outright majority. And I think that's only achieved once in the history of devolution under Alex Salmond back in 2011. That would unlock the plan for independence. So a lot really rides on what happens in Scotland, which obviously we'll be coming back to when we analyse the results, Sam. And it's not, I suppose we have a tendency south of the border to see it in the context of Labour. Yeah, how is the SNP doing, giving a pasting to Labour? But there is certainly that undertow there. Also, from Swinney's point of view, if he did get that, got back up to that overall majority, then the pressure to go further for those in this party who think that they've lagged a bit on the independence quest would rise as well. And our old friend, the topic Scottish independence, will be back on the agenda.
Let's look at Wales. Plaid have extended their advantage over Reform in the final YouGov MRP. Seems to have extended their lead in the election campaign. That central scenario has Plaid Cymru on 43 seats and Reform taking 34. So just 2 weeks ago, YouGov had Plaid and Reform basically neck and neck, Reform one seat ahead in the projection. But now Plaid sort of comprehensively ahead. A bit of that, and I have to say, health warning, is a function of Wales's hyper-complicated voting system that can amplify small movements that for pollsters are within the margin of error. And so I'm a little bit cautious about suggesting there's been a big kind of surge in one direction or another actually on the ground, just because it's very hard to poll given that system. But one clear signal from the poll, Labour still significantly down. They're on 12 seats. I thought this raises the question, there's a strong showing for Plaid, but interestingly from a Westminster point of view, which bluntly is where our listeners are quite often from, just a little sense that will be taken away from this poll, whether it's statistically fair or not, that the shine has slightly come off Reform.
Oh, yes. And I think the problem, and I do think it is potentially a big problem, is that £5 million gift to Nigel Farage from the donor Christopher Harbon, based in Thailand, a crypto titan, subject of a lot of complaints. And we're waiting to hear from the Electoral Commissioner and the Commissioner for Standards in Parliament whether there'll be a full investigation into that. Reform saying very clearly that it is a gift. It was intended to support Nigel Farage's personal safety. And he says that they've looked at every legal angle. There's no obligation to declare such a personal gift. It's not the same category as a donation, but 5 million is a lot. Nigel Farage's answer to that is, it will ensure I can be safe for the rest of my life. So that's really, he has to keep making that argument, but it's a gift. It's not registered. It's got a sort of suggestion around it, that it just feels like a personal favour to Nigel Farage, and that's quite a lot of security that will buy you. For some reason, it sort of reminds me a bit of the Meghan and Harry tendency to bring everything back to their personal security. Not that that's not important, but is that going to be enough of an excuse on this one?
We will see from Dave's various watchdogs whether they decide to pick this up and investigate it. Interestingly, the Tories, I think, really, really want this story to run, and they've been working quite hard with broadcasters behind the scenes to try and make that happen. But when you push Kemi Badenoch on it, she doesn't go any further than calling it fishy. She did that again to me yesterday, which I have to say, in the scale of political accusations that you and I have heard over the years, that's at the slightly more cautious end. And you contrast that with the way Labour are dealing with this. Anna Turley, Labour chairman, saying Farage appears to have broken the rules again by failing to declare this cash. They deny that. I'm just very struck that why the Tories are more cautious than Labour on this. And I thought about it quite a lot, and I don't really have a good explanation. Anyway, that all sort of transpired as one part of my interview with Kemi Badenoch yesterday, which is part of Sky's wider series with all the leaders in the run-up to the local elections. I saw her in the West Midlands. I actually saw her in an aluminium foundry, which allowed me to open with the joke, "Welcome to the scrap heap," which I think she enjoyed.
Oh, Sam.
Sorry. You'll be able to hear the work of the foundry in the background in a moment. Interesting choice of campaign area, because Reform are doing quite well in the West Midlands, as YouGov were projecting last week. Now, obviously, Kemi Badenoch hates talking about what happens with Reform in any political, mathematical context, not least post-election with councils and national parliaments. But one of the big things that I wanted to just put to her was that there is just a difference between the Tories and every other major political party, because they would work with Reform UK if necessary, and the other political main parties have ruled that out in all contexts. So listen above the din to how defensively I thought she talked about this subject when I raised it.
We have a test case. Last year, we had lots of elections where Reform won many councils. How many of them are being run with Conservatives? 0. So we have proof. We are willing to work with people who will help deliver Conservative policy.
Well, let's see how that works out in practice when we look to the aftermath of May the 7th. It's just quite amusing to me. I've spoken to Reform people, which are there also, we don't want any more people over from the Tories. We've got too many of them already. Kemi Badenoch there, as you say, with that defensive tone with you. But is that really sustainable? Or, is it going to be a sort of awkward walk towards some form of accommodation on the right?
She was quite awkward as well. I asked her about Lord Ashcroft's birthday party. Lord Ashcroft, again, a big Tory donor. He placed Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch and her husband at the same table. She really, really didn't want to talk about that. But the bit of the interview that for me was the most meaty, and I hope you indulge me because I want to just play the central bit of this interview, is about a potentially big contradiction, right? We know that Kemi's at least the least unpopular of the various big party leaders, more popular than her party. But why is that Tory brand as it is? And I think I found a little bit of an answer. Nationally, the brand that she espouses is low tax and high growth. But local Tory councils, and of course, we're talking about the local elections, put up tax and frankly show sometimes of signs of NIMBY behaviour. So I wanted to put this to her, and I began by pointing out that 30 of the 35 Tory-led councils put up council tax by basically the maximum you can do without a referendum, and asked her whether or not the Tories weren't a case of say one thing and do another.
One of the things that we need to recognise is that many councils get their money from the government. You look at the rural payments grants. Labour has changed this to favour urban areas. That's one of the reasons why Conservative councils, which are quite often in rural areas, are having to do things differently. But you look at the services they provide, they're still delivering more compared to other councils. I'm not saying Conservative councils are perfect. I'm not saying they don't do anything wrong. But across the board, you can rely on them.
The national message is growth. But what's her view on Tory councils saying no?
You took a great game on growth. We've done a lot of research into growth and things that are holding back this country, and particularly into councils that block planning applications, what's known as unreasonably, when it goes to appeal. 7 of the top 10 councils that paid out the most for unreasonable decisions, for blockages that shouldn't have happened, were Tory councils. 181 cases of unreasonable planning decisions amongst the 7 top Tory councils. Tory councils are NIMBY councils. Isn't that the reality?
No, I don't think so. What I also know is that most people are now very resentful of a lot of infrastructure because they think that things are imposed on their communities. You look at London. London building has fallen by about 80%. This is one of the things that's going wrong. And then lots of other areas are having to pick up the burden.
And there is that really difficult area for Conservatives who've wanted to devolve and who see their local councils as being able to respond to local needs and maybe not get as trapped into the centralism of Labour, Sam. And then, quite rightly, you're then able to point out the fact that they're raising council taxes when she is running overall on a tax reduction message.
Yeah, no, we'll see how that works itself out. One more final thing, and that is it's something to bookmark for Friday, right? How should we judge the Tory local election campaign? Now, a lot of people think it's completely fair to go, well, let's compare the Tories now with how they did in the general election, because Kemi Badenoch took over that year, and the polling suggests that if you do that, she might be in for quite a pasting. But Kemi had a different answer on that. She said, actually, the way to compare her is by comparing the results this year to the results last year. Listen to this.
Local election results and general election results don't necessarily tarry. Or marry up. What is important is, are we making progress versus how people view the Conservative Party last year, year on year? I want to see us moving forward.
So there you have it. Compare results to 2025, not to 2024. Remember, and success in politics always simply depends on the baseline. Everybody in politics can be a winner if they get to define their own baseline. If you win the baseline argument, you're winning the argument overall. So well done her for at least giving that a go. Right, Anne, you've got news of Keir Starmer and how he's going to deal with the next few days.
Yes, Playbook today catching wind of a Keir Starmer big speech to come after the local election. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be a victory one. Preparations in number 10 to lean into difficult results. Dan Bloom picking up that there are plans to talk about policy, about overall direction of the government. In some ways, it would be odd if the Labour leader didn't do that. The question is how far he can lean into any form of substantial change, and the kind of change that those challenging him and from the soft left of the party have been basically scratching at the door, saying that they want something that sounds different. Now, the King's speech agenda is already nailed down, so there's not much of opportunity to do anything new there. So what options does Starmer have here? And that's a bit puzzling, because at the same time, I think we've certainly been briefed, and some others, that there is going to be some big speech, but what's in it? And the reset narrative does tend to get not another one response, doesn't it, for Starmer? So I did text someone in the Labour apparatus until recently and said, well, this looks like a kind of phase 3 reaction or plan coming on from Keir Starmer, and his response was, or is it phase 33? That's even people who've been inside the machinery and supposed to sound more impressed. So I'm intrigued as to what he can pull out of the hat there.
I'm glad Keir Starmer's giving a speech. It would be slightly odd if he wasn't giving a speech. We talked yesterday about how there's not much time really in practice before the half-term break where MPs go off. A former Tory MP got in touch to point out that in the aftermath of the King's speech, there's a whole load of one-line whip days. So even the days that I thought lots of MPs would be around Parliament, they're not. They really only need to be around Parliament for King's Speech Day and for the final PMQs and set of voting, and all the days in between. There's no need to be around Westminster. So serendipitously, I think the whips have decided that there's no need for much of May to see all their colleagues. Although this Tory MP says that might, or ex-Tory MP says that might be a miscalculation. Actually, people can get more het up and more fevered when they're not in Westminster and there aren't soothing colleagues to calm them down. So we'll see how that goes. But of course, external events always bring pressure to bear. And tell us about what's going on with America.
Well, it's an anniversary today we shouldn't miss, which is a bit of a painful one for the government. I think it's a year since the breakthrough on the trade deal with Donald Trump. If you remember, that was really applauded at the time as a fancy footwork by Keir Starmer. Well, a year on, we know the difficulties of that. Peter Kyle will be at the G7 Trade Summit. Perhaps he's checking in on whether the whiskey tariff relief promised by the American president last week to the King on his visit, whether that is really going to get nailed down. But the big story behind the scenes is on the concessions that Starmer gave a year ago in a phone call from Donald Trump, which forced him to choose and to make a kind of personal choice pretty much in the moment on the final trade-off of tariff favors. If you remember, they were between, there's an unappetizing dish, pork or bioethanol. And he chose the pork. He chose to take the leeway on that to protect British industry. And that has had massive implications for the bioethanol industry. There's a really interesting piece by my trade colleague, Sophie Inch, a deep dive on the consequences of that and the implications for farming and for the fuel derived from it. And it's just a reminder that, what we thought was perhaps nailed on a year ago, has come to look so much less solid when it comes to Britain and trade and Donald Trump.
I think listeners to this podcast know of many of the hitches with our trading relationship with the US, which we've been pretty good at charting. I think there's a problem with the way that politicians talk about trade deals. They present them as massive wins. They're very complicated, very nuanced changes to our economy with big winners and big losers. And simply, putting them up in lights for electoral gain and suggesting that you're at the master of the global stage by signing one is just probably not helpful to anyone. Anyway, on that note, let's wrap it up for today. Thank you very much indeed. We will be back on Friday morning at pretty much the usual time to give you everything you need to know about what just happened overnight. And by Friday morning, our friends in the psephology and polling and results industry, the esteemed, in fact, academic Michael Thrasher told me we pretty much have a very good picture of what's going on in England by the time we record. So listen to that episode, and then we'll have a good idea what's happening to Keir Starmer when we record again on Sunday morning. So 2 more unmissable episodes this week, you lucky listeners. We'll see you then.
See you Friday.
I'm Michael Gove.
And I'm Madeline Grant, and we're here to tell you why you should be listening to Quite Right from The Spectator.
Every week we unpack the politics, culture and ideas driving the news.
And occasionally driving us to despair.
It's a place for a perspective that you won't get anywhere else. Much like this. He was the multiple wenching, chicken wing chomping lord of misrule.
And with the occasional detour. Your mode of dancing I would not recommend to any pregnant woman.
That's Quite Right from The Spectator, available wherever you get your podcasts.